It really wasn't that I didn't appreciate the effort. It's just a handmade scrapbook. I mean, we were adults, past the age of elementary school crafts. I truly expected something substantial, something real, like a nice piece of jewelry, perhaps a designer bag, not something that felt like it belonged in a kindergarten art show. I honestly thought he'd just laugh with me, that we'd share a chuckle over the unexpected simplicity of it. I never imagined he'd take it so personally, that he'd be so deeply offended. It really wasn't that I didn't appreciate the effort he put in. That's what I told myself, over and over. My issue was simply the kind of gift it was. A handmade scrapbook? For his birthday? For my boyfriend's birthday? It felt completely out of place. We were both in our mid-20s, well past the age of elementary school art projects, I thought. I had certain expectations. I truly did. I imagined something more substantial, something that felt real, in my definition of the word, like a beautiful piece of jewelry, perhaps a luxurious designer handbag, or even a surprise weekend trip somewhere exotic, but certainly not pages filled with cut-out photos and simple childish drawings and little handwritten notes. My mind just couldn't reconcile it. I genuinely believed he'd understand. I thought he'd even find it a bit amusing, that we'd share a quick chuckle together, a knowing look about its sweet but ultimately awkward nature. I never, not for a single moment, anticipated his reaction, his deep offense, or how deeply personal he would take my spontaneous laughter. He knew me. He understood my preferences, my appreciation for tangible quality, for things that had a clear, measurable value. I had always been very open about enjoying the finer things in life, not in a greedy way, I believed, more as a reflection of good taste, an appreciation for craftsmanship. I thought he accepted this about me, that it was just a part of who I was, a small quirk in my personality. That's why the scrapbook felt so wrong, so completely out of line with what I expected. I convinced myself it wasn't about the money spent, not really. It was about the type of gift, the thought behind it. It felt so utterly misaligned with my established preferences. Our relationship had been going on for just over a year. It felt comfortable, settled, predictable. He was a good man, steady, kind, and always supportive. We'd met quite casually, through mutual friends, at a low-key bar downtown. Things had moved smoothly between us. No major drama, no big fights. He was constantly attentive, quick to notice if I needed something, always offering to help. He genuinely cared about my well-being. It was clear. His job in finance was demanding. He often worked very long hours. My own job in marketing also required a lot of my time. So our free time together was precious. We usually spent it unwinding, quiet dinners at home, or watching movies on the couch, sometimes just sitting together in comfortable silence. He consistently brought me thoughtful little gifts, a new book by an author I liked, a rare blend of coffee from a small shop, a soft, warm scarf when it got cold. These small gestures, regular and consistent, made me feel valued, important, cherished. They were little signs of his constant consideration. I tried to give back, in my own ways. I made sure to remember his favorite meals, his favorite snacks. I carefully planned weekend getaways that I knew he'd enjoy. I was always there to listen when he had a particularly tough day at the office. I believed our bond was strong, built on shared experiences, mutual respect, a deep understanding of each other's personalities. At least, that's what I thought. He knew I had a preference for quality, for things that possessed an intrinsic value, or showed careful craftsmanship. I truly wasn't a material girl, driven by simple greed, or so I believed. I just appreciated the aesthetics, the effort put into well-made items. I thought he understood this about me, that it was simply part of who I was, a minor personal trait, one that he accepted, if not fully shared. That's precisely why the scrapbook felt so off, so completely out of sync with what I thought he knew about my preferences. I told myself it wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about the kind of gift, the thought behind it. It was just so completely wrong for me. It was his birthday, a date I'd carefully marked on my calendar weeks in advance. My plans were well thought out: a reservation at a highly rated restaurant he loved, a new tech gadget for his home office, something I knew he'd appreciate. We were celebrating at my apartment, a cozy, intimate evening, before our dinner reservation. The atmosphere felt light, cheerful, full of anticipation for the night ahead. Then came the moment for exchanging gifts. I handed him his neatly wrapped present. I watched his face light up. He seemed genuinely pleased as he carefully undid the ribbon. Then it was his turn. He pulled out a somewhat awkwardly wrapped package from behind his back. A faint, nervous smile played on his lips. He explained, his voice a little shaky, that he had something truly special for me, something that came straight from his heart. As he presented it, I saw it right away. It was a homemade scrapbook. The cover was simple, a little lopsided maybe, but clearly made by hand. The pages inside were filled with a chaotic mix, yet it was an earnest collection of printed photos of us, candid snapshots from our dates, goofy selfies taken on spontaneous outings, even small sentimental items like old concert tickets. Each page had little handwritten captions. Some even had small, earnest, hand-drawn hearts or stars. My initial, unfiltered reaction was immediate, an awkward, almost involuntary chuckle. It was just so incredibly unexpected, so undeniably handmade. My initial, strained smile quickly faltered. It morphed into something less controlled, less polite. Then a genuine, uncontrollable burst of laughter escaped me. It wasn't born of malice, not at first. It was just an automatic, visceral reaction to the sheer, surprising, and frankly, childlike nature of the gift. I managed to force out the word cute. I was trying desperately to soften the blow, but then, without thinking, I added, but also a little childish, don't you think? The words. They were laced with an unintentional but unmistakable tone of mockery. They spilled out before I could stop them, before I could even begin to consider their profound impact. I didn't truly understand, not yet, that he had poured weeks of his precious time and energy into creating that book. He had often stayed up late into the night, long after his demanding workdays were over. He painstakingly cut out each photo, carefully wrote each caption. He was striving to make every page perfect, every detail a testament to his affection. He had mentioned vague hints of a special project he was working on. I had idly assumed it was for his job, or maybe a new, obscure hobby I knew nothing about. The idea that this project could be my birthday gift had simply never, ever crossed my mind. The realization of his immense effort came much, much too late. He went completely silent. His face, which had been beaming with expectant pride moments before, now registered an expression of profound disbelief. Then, a slow, creeping wave of deeply wounded hurt. The silence that descended upon the room became suffocatingly heavy. It was thick with the weight of unspoken feelings. Yet, even in that moment, I failed to fully grasp the true depth of his pain. I kept talking, trying to rationalize my reaction, to explain it away as a quirk of my personality, but my words only seemed to dig the hole deeper, making the situation worse. I blurted out something about expecting something real, something more grown up, something that reflected the seriousness of our adult relationship. He just watched me. His eyes were cold now, completely devoid of any warmth, any trace of the affectionate glow they usually held. Later that evening, I still didn't understand the gravity of it. I still thought he was just overreacting. So I even posted a sarcastic comment in a private group chat with some of my closest friends. I playfully described the adorable but totally not adult gift I had received. I added a few emojis for dramatic effect. I chuckled to myself as I typed it, confident that my friends would share my amusement. Understanding the implied irony, I genuinely believed my reaction was harmless, just a bit of light-hearted teasing. That night, the atmosphere between us was suffocatingly heavy. It was colder than any argument we'd ever had. He barely spoke. He answered my attempts at conversation with short, clipped, monosyllabic words. I tried to apologize, to smooth things over. I said I hadn't meant to hurt his feelings, that my reaction was just an involuntary reflex, that I had genuinely believed he'd understand my particular sense of humor. He simply nodded. His eyes were distant. They betrayed no emotion, no hint of forgiveness. Later, in bed, he turned away from me. He presented a rigid back. It felt like an insurmountable wall. A silent, unbridgeable chasm opened between us. I eventually drifted off to sleep, feeling a mixture of confusion and a quiet annoyance at what I perceived as his exaggerated sensitivity, his disproportionate reaction to what I considered a minor mistake. The next morning, I woke up alone. The other side of the bed was cold, empty. He was already gone. My phone, lying neglected on my bedside table, buzzed with the stark notification of a new message. It was a long text from him. A list. My stomach plummeted as I began to read the precise, unyielding words. The message began with a formal, almost chillingly impersonal tone. Please return the following gifts. What followed was an exhaustive, itemized inventory. Each entry meticulously detailed. It included the delicate silver bracelet he had given me for our 6-month anniversary, the expensive, designer winter coat I'd admired for weeks in a store window, the latest model iPad he'd bought me for Christmas, and then, shockingly, it specified, the rent I covered for 3 months last year when you were between jobs, totaling exact amount he had paid. My eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed in a rising anger. I scrolled through the extensive inventory, every single significant item he had ever given me, each a stark, undeniable reminder of his past generosity, the precision of each entry, the specific details he had remembered. It felt like a deliberate, cruel jab. The message continued. His final words in the text cut deeper than any direct insult. They resonated with a cold, almost surgical precision. Since you value real things so much, things with quantifiable monetary value, I assume these tangible items will mean more to you than the memories I painstakingly tried to celebrate, the emotional effort I genuinely invested in a gesture that came from my heart. I actually laughed out loud when I finished reading it. A sharp, incredulous, almost hysterical sound escaped me. I thought he was bluffing, playing some elaborate, incredibly dramatic game. There was absolutely no way he was serious. This had to be an absurd, exaggerated response, designed solely to make a point. A theatrical gesture intended to teach me a lesson about appreciating sentimental value. He couldn't possibly expect me to actually gather and return every single item on that extensive list. It was utterly ridiculous. A childish tantrum. I even considered texting him back something equally sarcastic, something that would call his bluff directly, daring him to follow through, but something in the utter, unyielding coldness of his message, the sheer conviction behind his words, it stopped me. A faint, unsettling shiver ran down my spine. I headed out for my day as usual, still somewhat amused, still half annoyed by what I perceived as his dramatic, attention-seeking outburst. I went to work, had lunch, finished my day, carrying a smug confidence that he would eventually back down. But when I came home later that evening, the stark, brutal reality of his seriousness slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. My apartment door wasn't fully closed. It was ajar by a few inches, a silent invitation to a devastating discovery, pushed neatly against the outside of my door, precisely aligned, and sealed with packing tape, were several large brown moving boxes. Inside, all my personal belongings that had been stored at his place, my extra sets of clothes, my favorite worn blanket, my collection of beloved books, my personal toiletries, even the spare charging cables I kept by his bed, every single item that signified my presence in his life. It was meticulously packed and returned. On top of the stack of boxes was a plain white envelope. It contained a single cold object, my key to his apartment, and nestled beside it, a small, simple note, handwritten in his neat, familiar script. It echoed the chilling words of his earlier text. "I believe you have something of mine." My heart sank, plummeting to the floor of my stomach. This wasn't a bluff. He was completely, utterly serious. And the gravity of my mistake, of my cruel, dismissive laughter, it finally began to suffocate me. Panic, cold and sharp, gripped me instantly. I immediately called him. My fingers fumbled with urgency, but his phone went straight to voicemail, the familiar tone mocking my desperation. I tried texting. My messages were frantic, filled with genuinely heartfelt apologies. I repeated that it had all been a terrible joke, that I hadn't meant to insult him, that I hadn't realized, truly realized, how much effort and emotion he had poured into that scrapbook. I tried to explain away my initial reaction, to minimize the damage, to somehow, impossibly, talk my way back into his life, to regain the ground I had so carelessly lost. Each text I sent got no answer. They showed as delivered, but they remained infuriatingly unread, or at least unacknowledged, trapped in a digital void of his choosing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of agonizing silence, he sent a single, short, and utterly devastating text back. His words were colder than anything I could have ever imagined, utterly devoid of any warmth, any trace of the profound affection he had once shown me. "Return the gifts, all of them, every single item. Then maybe we can talk, but not as a couple, not anymore." The finality of his message, the complete and total lack of emotion, it crushed me like a physical weight. There was no room for negotiation, no hint of a second chance. He wasn't playing games. He wasn't bluffing. He was truly, irrevocably done with us. Done with me. I tried calling him again. A desperate, last-ditch effort, but his number was blocked. My social media accounts, which I frantically checked, were now blocked from viewing any of his profiles. He had systematically, meticulously, completely cut me off, erasing me from his digital life, just as he was, with chilling precision, erasing me from his actual physical world. The reality of my new, isolated existence began to sink in. Then came the excruciating conversations with my friends. I had expected immediate sympathy, comforting words, perhaps even some shared eye-rolling at what I still, in my distorted perception, viewed as his overreaction. Instead, their reactions were a startlingly cold, hard dose of reality, a painful mirror reflecting the true ugliness of my actions. One by one, they expressed their utter disbelief at my behavior, their quiet disappointment. Sarah, who had been my closest confidant for years, listened patiently to my tearful recounting. Then, gently but firmly, she delivered a truth that cut me to the bone. I had humiliated him. She explained that he had clearly poured his entire heart into that gift, a deeply personal attempt to be genuine and sincere, and I had publicly mocked him for it, turning his vulnerability into a joke. She emphatically stated that he wasn't overreacting. He was simply reacting, logically and justifiably, to a profound betrayal of his trust and affection. Another friend, quieter but equally direct, pointed out that I had, in effect, told him that his feelings, his sincere efforts, and his very heart were childish and not real in my eyes. Their unified front, their quiet disapproval, their collective withdrawal. It hit me harder than any of his cold final messages. I realized with a sickening lurch that I had not only deeply wounded him, but had also, in my arrogance, alienated many of the people I truly cared about. Those within our shared circle of friends. The full, crushing weight of what I had so carelessly done began to settle upon me. A suffocating blanket of regret. I had completely, utterly underestimated him. I had seen his kindness as a form of weakness, his earnestness as a childish naivete, and now the bitter consequences were starkly evident. I was left utterly without a relationship, devoid of the comforting, steady presence he had provided, completely giftless, and publicly shamed in front of our once-shared social sphere. The items on his list, which I now had to painstakingly gather and organize for return, felt impossibly heavy in my hands. They were no longer cherished symbols of affection, but rather stark, tangible monuments to my own callousness, my own profound insensitivity. Each item I boxed up was a physical reminder of a memory I had dismissed, a sentiment I had scoffed at. Alone in my apartment, it felt emptier and colder than ever before. I scrolled slowly through the endless stream of photos on my phone, pictures of us laughing, captured moments of shared joy, silly selfies taken on spontaneous outings, snapshots of a relationship that had, to outward appearances, seemed genuinely happy. Each one was a tiny, digital memory, fleeting and insubstantial in the face of our shattered reality. My mind kept returning to the scrapbook, the actual physical pages filled with those very same memories, brought to life with his careful handwriting, and those small, earnest, hand-drawn hearts. In that exact moment, a profound, aching, and utterly inescapable realization hit me with the force of a tidal wave. The scrapbook, that very childish collection of moments that I had so cruelly dismissed, it actually held more genuine love, more sincere effort, and more true, irreplaceable value than any expensive piece of jewelry, any luxury handbag, or any high-tech gadget he had ever purchased for me. It wasn't just a gift, it was a tangible piece of his heart, a physical manifestation of his deepest feelings for me, and I had, with thoughtless cruelty, simply laughed at it, discarding its true worth. Now, he had unmistakably moved on. His social media profiles, though permanently blocked from my view, were undoubtedly filled with new moments, new smiles, new people, a new life unfolding without any trace of me. And I was left with absolutely no gifts from him, no relationship to speak of, and an impossibly long, seemingly endless list of regrets stretching out before me, each one a sharp pang in my soul. The silence in my apartment was deafening. It was amplified by the stark absence of his daily good morning texts, his thoughtful questions about my day, his constant, gentle, reassuring presence that I had once taken so utterly for granted. I had been so consumed by my desire for a real gift, something substantial, something that resonated with my materialistic preferences, and in my narrow-minded pursuit of that elusive realness, I had unknowingly, carelessly, and irrevocably thrown away the most truly real and precious thing I had ever possessed, his genuine affection, his pure, unadulterated love. The echoes of my laughter, once so dismissive, now haunted me, a constant reminder of how profoundly I had misjudged, and how much I had truly lost. The realization settled deep within me, a cold, hard truth. I had wanted a trophy, a material representation of value. He had offered me his heart, a priceless piece of himself, and I had, without a second thought, chosen to mock the latter. The sting of that choice was a constant companion now. It followed me everywhere. In the quiet moments before sleep, in the bustling noise of the city, he had moved on, and I was left, utterly alone, with the echoes of my own dismissive laughter, and an empty apartment filled only with my regrets.